Welcome to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. Join us every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio for a look at the life, deeds, and words of Yeshua Messiah and his followers from the Torah-centric Hebraic perspective they were originally lived and written in.
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it, and you'll find rest for your souls. You'll find rest for your souls. Oh, you'll find rest for your souls when you walk in his way.
Today's program is about Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 21. What is the heart of the Sabbath? Were Messiah's disciples not keeping the Sabbath because they plucked and ate from the field of grain? Why did Yeshua heal on the Sabbath? Who or what should govern how we keep it? Was Messiah's issue with the Pharisees because they wanted him to keep the Sabbath according to the Torah? Or was it that they were imposing traditions and understandings of men contrary to Yahweh's original intent when he gave the Sabbath? And what can answering these questions teach us about Yahweh's purpose for the Torah and how we should apply it to our lives? Stay tuned through the end of this program for Eliyahu ben David's insight on these questions and more in Matthew chapter 12. Now, here's today's scripture portion. Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 21. At that time, Yeshua went out on the Sabbath day through the grain fields. His disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But the Pharisees, when they saw it, said to him, "Behold, your disciples do what is not legal to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered into the house of Elohim and ate the showbread, which was not legal for him to eat, neither for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the Torah that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? But I tell you that one greater than the temple is here. But if you had known what this means, 'I desire mercy and not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." He departed there and went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man with a withered hand. They asked him, "Is it legal to heal on the Sabbath day?" that they might accuse him. He said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if this one falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, won't he grab onto it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is legal to do good on the Sabbath day." Then he told the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and it was restored whole, just like the other one. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how they might destroy him. Yeshua, perceiving that, withdrew from there. Great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all, and commanded them that they should not make him known, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through Isaiah the prophet, saying, "Behold, my servant, whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit on him. He will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not strive, nor shout, neither will anyone hear his voice in the streets. He won't break a bruised reed. He won't quench a smoking flax, until he leads justice to victory. In his name, the nations will hope." And now, here's Eliyahu ben David on these verses.
We're going to be talking about the Sabbath and what it is, how some people keep it, and how Messiah kept it, and what he taught us. We're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 12 tonight to learn about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is one of my favorite things, so I'm really happy to be talking about it. And we're going to look into what Yeshua had to say about it. In Matthew chapter 12, it starts out telling us about this situation that happened with Yeshua and his disciples on the Sabbath. It says, at that time, Yeshua went on the Sabbath through the grain fields. His disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But the Pharisees, when they saw it, said to him, behold, your disciples do what is not legal to do on the Sabbath. Well, are the Pharisees right? You know, the scriptures tell us don't work on the Sabbath, right? Maybe they shouldn't have been out there in the field picking the grain. What do you think? Perhaps we ought to look into it a little more closely and see if they had an argument for that. The Pharisees had a rule, and I'm quoting it here. He that reaps on the Sabbath day ever so little is guilty, and plucking of heads of grain is a derivation of reaping. So their rule is not only that reaping your field is wrong. Now, if you were reaping your field, what would you be doing? You'd be going out there, you'd be collecting all the grain, right? You'd be wanting to bring it into the barn. Whole big day's work, right? But they're saying just plucking a few heads of grain to eat is equivalent to reaping. That's their rule. So according to their rule, Messiah and his men did break their Sabbath rule. But what about the commandment? The commandment that Yahweh gave for the Sabbath. Leviticus 23, verse 3 tells us, 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no kind of work. It is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwellings. Well, let's break this down a little bit. Let's take a look at the Hebrew words so that we can define our terms and understand what this commandment is really saying. First of all, the Sabbath. You know, a lot of times when we think of the Sabbath, we think, well, that's just a day of rest. But you know, that's not exactly what the word Sabbath means. It means intermission. It's an intermission between your days of work. So you have 6 days of work, you have the Sabbath, which is an intermission, and then you go back to work again. And it does come from another word that has to do with repose or desisting from exertion. So you exert yourself in your occupation, whatever you do, for 6 days, and then you repose, have an intermission before you do it again. The term Sabbath rest is kind of interesting because it's not just resting. According to the BDB Hebrew definition, a Sabbath rest is Sabbath observance. So it's a rest and observance appropriate to the particular Sabbath, because Sabbaths are not all the same, right? Some of them, for instance, the Passover falls on a Sabbath. You behave differently on that Sabbath than you do on an ordinary Sabbath. How about at the end of the month? That Sabbath is different than other Sabbaths. So the word actually means a rest and appropriate observance of a particular Sabbath. Now, you wouldn't get that from reading the English word, would you? You just think it's just rest. But it's tied directly to the Sabbath. In fact, the word is Sabbaton. So it's very specific. Then we have the word work. What is work? Well, when we look up the Hebrew word, it's occupation, work, business. Has to do with your regular activity, your regular work, your regular business, your regular occupation. And the whole idea is you rest from that on the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath. 6 days you do your regular occupation, then you have an intermission from that. So here's where we can put that all together. 6 days shall work, business be done. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath intermission, a solemn rest, that is, rest and observance of that Sabbath, a holy convocation. You shall do no kind of work, business. It is a Sabbath, rest and observance to Yahweh in all your dwellings. So when we look at this, we think about the disciples walking through a field on the Sabbath. They're hungry. They pick a few grains from the field and eat them. Are they engaging in their regular occupation and business? Are they, in that sense, doing work? Well, where does it say in the scriptures that you can't eat on the Sabbath? The Sabbath is not a fast day. You can't eat on the Sabbath. So when we really look at this, while Messiah and his men did break the Pharisaical rule, they did not break the commandment. They were not engaged in regular employment or an occupation. They were just eating. And I'm thinking pretty much everybody on the Sabbath was eating. And picking the grains certainly is not something they were doing as part of a regular occupation. So what you see here is that the Pharisees had a rule that was more stringent than the commandment, that they required more. Well, obviously they didn't really understand the Sabbath by adding this more stringent requirement. So Messiah decided he needed to take the Pharisees to school to teach them about the Sabbath. And it's very instructive to see what happened here. He said this in Matthew 12, 3 and 4. But he said to them, haven't you read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered into the house of Elohim and ate the showbread, which was not legal for him to eat, neither for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Well, what about this story? Is this true? In our Midrash, we've looked into this in detail, so we're not going to go into this too deeply right now. However, for every Sabbath period, loaves of bread were placed in the holy place of the temple before Jehovah, or Yehovah, there in the holy place. And the purpose of this bread was called the bread of the presence, or the bread of faces. It was to remind Yahweh of all of the faces of his people. And when this bread would get changed out, there were 12 loaves for the 12 tribes of Israel. When these would get changed out each Shabbat, then the bread that was taken out would be given to Aaron and the priests. And as it says here, it shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy to him of the offerings of Yahweh. Now, there were a number of sacrifices like this that the priests alone could eat. And these offerings, once they went into the hands of the priests to eat these things, it was done in a holy place because this was considered a fellowship meal with Yahweh, that the priesthood was actually engaging in a fellowship meal together with Yahweh. So it's true, this bread was for Aaron and the priests. Now let's see what happened, and this is greatly abbreviated, the story that I'm pointing to. You could read the entire thing in 1 Samuel 21 for more details. But it says, David said to Ahimelech the priest, "Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever there is present." The priest answered David, "There is no common bread under my hand, but there is holy bread." So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there, but showbread that was taken from before Yahweh. So imagine this now. David and his men are hungry, just like Yeshua and his men were hungry in the field. And David asked the priest for bread. And the priest had none other except for the holy bread. And David asked him for that. And ultimately, he gave him the holy bread. Well, was David wrong? Was the priest wrong? The Rabbi Kimchi said this about this incident. "When he found there was none but showbread, give it me, that we may not die with hunger, for danger of life drives away the Sabbath." So he's saying David told the priest that he would die of hunger. Now, I doubt that he was actually going to die, but he really needed food. And the rabbinical rule here is danger of life drives away the Sabbath. So, interestingly, when Yeshua brought up this story to the Pharisees, he wasn't bringing up something that they didn't know about or nobody ever talked about in relation to the Sabbath. He knew they actually already had a rule about this. And they had decided that the hunger of David and his men took precedence. And that's why the priest could give them the holy bread. So here's the point. Messiah is pointing out the inconsistency of the Pharisees. Their rules allowed a very significant exception for hungry David and his men, but not even a minor exception for hungry Messiah and his men. Why the difference? They liked David. They didn't like Yeshua. Here's another example that Messiah brought up. "Or have you not read in the Torah that on the Sabbath day, the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? But I tell you that one greater than the temple is here." Well, is that true? Did the priests actually profane the Sabbath? Well, take a look. Here's priests working on the Sabbath from the book of Numbers 28. "On the Sabbath day, offer 2 male lambs a year old without blemish." This is Yahweh talking to the priests. "And 2/10 parts of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering mixed with oil and the drink offering of it. This is the burnt offering of every Sabbath, besides the continual burnt offering and the drink offering of it. The truth is, on the Sabbath, this would be the day where the new course would come in. But the old course of priests would also stay in on the Sabbath. So there were twice as many priests working. And the reason is there was a great deal more offerings and so forth done on the Sabbath than any other day. And what about if it was a special day, like, for instance, Passover? There might be even more, or booths, for example. So not only did the priests work on the Sabbath, they did a lot of work on the Sabbath. Just imagine what it would be like, really, dealing with all of those animals and offering all of those animals, in some cases, hundreds in a day. It's a lot of work. Well, what about that? How could they be working like that on the Sabbath? Well, there was a rabbinical rule about that as well. Here was the rabbinical rule for the temple. That which is forbidden to be done on the Sabbath is lawful to be done in the sanctuary. In other words, the sanctuary is a holy place. All of this is done for a holy purpose for Yahweh. This is not ordinary work, is it? This is work for Yahweh in the temple. So the ordinary Sabbath rules didn't apply in the temple because everything that was done there was done for him. Well, we have this statement of Yeshua saying, "But I tell you that one greater than the temple is here." So he's saying to them, listen, if the priests are accepted from Sabbath rules because of the temple, how much more should Messiah's men be accepted from religious rules because of Messiah, who is greater than the temple? And really, why were they in that field and eating that grain? Were they not moving from one place to another where they were ministering to people on the Sabbath? And how is that really much different than what the priests would do in the Sabbath? You know, different kind of ministering, but in most cases, it's ministering. So if the priests could do that on account of the temple, how much more so the disciples because of Messiah? Good argument. Well, then Messiah follows up with this. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, these verses are packed with meaning. And they're pretty amazing when you realize that what Messiah is basically telling these folks who are supposed to be the experts is that they don't really know anything about the Sabbath. Pretty amazing thing to say to these people. But let's break this down a little bit. He was quoting from Hosea, chapter 6, verse 6, where it says, "For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of Elohim more than burnt offerings." And if you read this, these are the words of Yahweh through the prophet to the people at a time when the people were acting in a very selfish way. There was a lot of injustice towards the poor, towards the disadvantaged. But it was generally thought that if they offered the sacrifices, if they did the ceremonial things, then they were going to be fine with Yahweh. So Yahweh's saying, hey, mercy is more important to me than these ceremonial things. And this is the heart of Yahweh. But somehow these Pharisees missed this. They didn't really get this. They didn't see that Yahweh has this order of priorities and that compassion and love for people is on a higher order with him than the keeping of these ceremonial things. Not that those are unimportant, but there's an order here. So Yahweh is talking here about his true heart. It mentions here the knowledge of Elohim. This is the experiential knowledge of the heart of Elohim. This is what the Pharisees were lacking, according to Yeshua. Somehow they hadn't had this experience of his heart, where they understood these priorities, that love is on a higher level to him than the ceremonial aspects of things. Love is really the priority. Now, it was very different for disciples of Messiah. They kept the Torah too. However, they kept it with these priorities in mind. So we find here in 1 Yohanan 4, 7 through 8, Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of Elohim. And everyone who loves is born of Elohim and knows Elohim. You notice that's exactly what it's talking about in Hosea? Knowing him. Everyone who loves knows him. He who doesn't love doesn't know Elohim, for Elohim is love. So, this is a huge difference. If you know Elohim, then you understand that love is his priority. So when you apply the Torah, you do it with that knowledge. But what if you don't really know him and you don't really grasp that? You don't really grasp that love is the priority. Then what does the Torah look like? It looks like a rule book, doesn't it? That's what you're thinking. And you think somehow, what makes God happy is doing all these little rules and regulations. And if you think that, you just miss the whole thing. And that's what happened with the Pharisees. They really got into the rules and regulations, so much so they wanted to add a whole bunch more onto what was originally there, thinking, well, gee, if God wants this much rules, if we give him like that much more, he's really going to like us. They missed it. Here's some verses from Matthew 22. And I'm adding them in here because they really help to drive home this point I'm talking about. Yeshua said, you shall love Adonai, your Elohim, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second, likewise, is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole Torah and the prophets depend on these two commandments. This word depend is actually from a Hebrew word that literally means to hang. For instance, in the King James Bible, it uses that word. It says, on these two commandments, hang all the law and the prophets. So just imagine this. You have the whole Torah, all of the commandments, and it's hanging on the two greatest commandments. Hanging. What is this telling us? You know, here in the United States, we have a law which is supposed to be the highest law of the land called the Constitution. And legislation is passed with different laws, and sometimes that legislation is challenged, can end up going to court, even the Supreme Court. And what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to compare that law to the Constitution, because the Constitution is considered the highest priority in law. And so, using the Constitution, they determine how that law should be understood. Well, this is a lot like what Yeshua is saying. The Constitution, in this case, is love for Yahweh and love for your neighbor. And then all of the commandments of the Torah hang on those two. Must be seen then in relation to those two. Love of God and love of neighbor. And that upsets some people, because they're going to say, well, yeah, but you need to keep the rules. However, in any body of law, there has to be priorities. What you're going to find in a practical way is that commandments, as with human laws, sometimes conflict with one another. Do I keep this one or do I keep this one? How do these relate to each other? You need to have some priority to decide sometimes how to apply the commandments. And this is where these two great commandments come in. Because you test it, all right, love of God. How does this fit in with love of God? All right, well, what about love of neighbor? How does this fit in with love of neighbor? You know what? Yahweh created you with a brain. He created you with a heart. He created you with free moral agency to be able to make choices. He created you in His image. If it was just a matter of following a bunch of rules, basically like a computer program, then He could have created you like a robot, and you could keep the Torah perfectly all the time. But the Torah is something higher than that. And it's meant for you to be fully engaged in your whole personhood. And to do that, you need to know Elohim. You need to understand His heart, which is a heart of love. And you need then to be able to make conscientious decisions about how to apply these commandments in a given situation. Now, in some ways, that's harder than just seeing everything as a black and white list. But which way is going to create the better person? Somebody who's just doing things by rote, or someone who is actually allowing themselves to be changed to become more and more like Yahweh by learning to think like He thinks? That's what the Torah is about. It's about actually creating righteous people. So, what Messiah was saying here is, without having the experiential knowledge of God's love, it is impossible to correctly apply the Torah. Now, this is so opposite to what people think about the Torah. Why is it that a lot of times Messianic people will tell you, well, the reason I keep the Jewish calendar is because I figured the Jews have to know the Torah. If they don't know Messiah, how well do they know the Torah? Nothing against them. They're trying, right? However, there's room to grow. And as I've mentioned before, in rabbinical Judaism, they don't even claim to know God. They say it's impossible to know God. So, can you see how big the divide really was between Messiah and rabbinical Judaism of his day? I mean, it's a chasm. I think it's such a joke that there are some Messianics that say Messiah was a Pharisee. Can you imagine that? When you see such a huge chasm between how he saw things and his level of the Torah and how they saw things and their level, just entirely different. There's no way that he could have been a Pharisee. And it's because they didn't have this experiential knowledge of the love of Elohim, he is saying, that they ended up condemning innocent men. This is what happens when we just follow rules without really applying the love of Elohim. And then he said this, the Lord of the Sabbath, called himself the Lord of the Sabbath. Who is the Lord of the Sabbath? The Lord of the Sabbath is the Lord who gave the Sabbath. Messiah is telling the Pharisees he was Yahweh. Think of it. Imagine that. That's what he was saying. Why would he say that? They had a rule. Here it is. It's about Jericho. The day in which Jericho was taken was the Sabbath day, and that though they slew and burnt on the Sabbath day, he that commanded the observation of the Sabbath commanded the profanation of it. If Messiah is Lord of the Sabbath, he can do what he wants on the Sabbath anyway, because he gave the Sabbath. And they even acknowledge that in their rules. Imagine that. However, having said that, although he claimed divinity through this statement, he continued to observe the Torah. So even though he was the Messiah, he gave the Sabbath, he could do something different, he kept it, he observed it. As an example to all of us. Here's what he did. He departed and went into their synagogue. And why did he go into their synagogue? Well, because on the Sabbath, there's a holy convocation. You're supposed to go to a holy convocation on the Sabbath. A holy convocation is a sacred meeting. You're supposed to meet with Israel on the Sabbath. That's part of the Sabbath rule, part of the Sabbath commandment that Yahweh spoke. So Messiah did that on the Sabbath. You read that over and over again, by the way, as we go through the Gospels. Messiah going to the synagogue on the Sabbath. You get in the book of Acts, you find the Apostle Paul going to the synagogue on the Sabbath over and over again. Why? Keeping the Sabbath commandment is why. Yes, there were opportunities to bear witness to Messiah on that day. That was a plus. That was a great thing. But it was obedience to the Sabbath. Why do you come to our meeting on the Sabbath? It's the same reason, isn't it? Because we're called to a holy convocation on the Sabbath. It's a time for us to have fellowship together in focusing on Yahweh, the God of the Sabbath. So it's interesting that Messiah set the example in that for us. Well, here's something that happened. You know, everywhere he went, just being himself, he kept getting into trouble with people. Can you relate to that? It says in Matthew 12:10 through 12, "Behold, there was a man with a withered hand. They asked him, 'Is it legal to heal on the Sabbath day?' That they might accuse him." See, by now they knew he could heal this guy, right? They'd seen him heal so many people. So they're trying to bait him into healing this man on the Sabbath. He said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep? And if this one falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, won't he grab onto it and lift it out?" He knew they would do that. He knew they would do that. You know, my dad was a dairy farmer. And usually he had like between 100 and 150 head of cattle. And they had the same routine every day. These dairy cows had to be milked twice a day. They had to be fed. Now, it might be the Sabbath for you, but it's not a Sabbath for your cows. As a matter of fact, if they're not milked, they're going to develop some pretty serious problems. If you take one day a week where you don't take care of them, they're going to develop serious problems. Anybody that takes care of animals knows about this. The shepherd taking care of the sheep. The sheep can't be completely ignored on the Sabbath. What do people like herdsmen and shepherds do on the Sabbath? Well, maybe they're going to be fortunate and they can get somebody who's not a believer to take care of it on the Sabbath. They might do that, but then some people will criticize them for doing that. They might reduce it to the absolute minimum that they need to do in order to humanely take care of their animals on the Sabbath. Well, let's say that's what they have to do. What are you going to do? Are you going to accuse them? Do you think Yahweh wants them to allow their animals to be abused? This is not even your neighbor. This is animals. Didn't he give man dominion over the earth to take care of the earth? Isn't it a responsibility if you have animals? Well, guess what? I'm not going to give you the answer as to what to do. I'm just telling you, there are real problems in real life when it comes to dealing with the Sabbath, and you have to figure it out. You need to know God. You need to know how he feels. What about people, remnant people in the exile? They have an employer. They have a family. They have a job where they work 5 regular days a week. They've committed to this job. And then they learn the calendar in the scriptures doesn't agree with our modern calendar. And they could end up having a Sabbath on a Wednesday. What are they going to do now? What would Yahweh have them do? We're in the exile. We're not in the land. We're in a point of transition, right? We're transitioning back to the land. Are we going to judge our brother because he's trying to find a way to deal with that in his life? He's transitioning. Do you think Yahweh is looking at him and saying, oh. Love needs to govern what we're doing. Even love for animals, right? Love for our family, love and respect for our boss. Now, while we're dealing with that situation, can't we try to develop perhaps a better situation? Maybe we can talk with our boss about it. Maybe we can find something else that we can do. We can transition into a situation where we can do better. You know, this is all Yahweh wants, is for us to keep doing our best, to keep his commandments. So, you know, there are ways while we're in the exile to do our best. If we're really doing that, and we're doing that with love of Yahweh, and we're looking for him to help us, he's going to help us. He's not looking just to condemn us because we don't keep everything according to the list. You know? Then he told the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and it was restored whole, just like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how they might destroy him. Last straw. He healed this man on the Sabbath. Sheep, people, whatever. Didn't matter to those Pharisees. They had had enough of Yeshua Messiah. Why? Think about it. The very fact that this man was divinely healed was proof that Messiah was right about the Sabbath, and they were wrong. And all the people that watched it happen, believe me, somebody being healed is going to have a lot more impact on those people than some egghead reciting rules, right? Because you're watching the real deal happen. You're watching someone who actually has authority to heal somebody. Who is right, that guy or that guy? So, you know, arguments weren't going to work anymore. There's only one thing that was going to work, and that was going to be to kill him. Because, why? Because it was not an issue of who was right. It was an issue of protecting the religious authority structure that was the source of all of the special perks that these guys got, all of their respect in the community. And that was all starting to fail because of this guy who was inconveniently telling people what the truth was. So, you know, you could change the authority structure or kill this guy. Which is it going to be? Pretty clear. Yeshua, perceiving that the Pharisees were conspiring to kill him, withdrew from there. He didn't hang around to get killed. What, wasn't he brave? Well, he was plenty brave, but he was also intelligent. No need to just hang around where people want to kill you, right? Go someplace else. That's what he did. That's what to do. That's what he told his disciples, too. If they persecute you one place, go to another place. That's what he said. That's what he did. However, he couldn't hide out because great multitudes followed him. And he healed them all and commanded them that they should not make him known. You know what he was doing in a way? I mean, he wasn't hiding, but he got a certain level of security just in the fact that he had all these multitudes of people around him all the time. Because those that wanted to do him in, they couldn't do it in an overt way. So this would give him some kind of security. But what about this fact that he told the multitudes not to make him known? What is that all about? Well, Messiah was not a politician. He wasn't campaigning for office as the Messiah. He was being the Messiah. So he didn't act like a politician would act. He didn't want people to come to him because he was a rock star and there was a movement. Those kind of people, they come and they're gone just as quick. He wanted the people to come to him for the right reasons, not just because they were influenced by other people. So that's how he was. That's how he behaved. And this is according to prophecy. And here Matthew quotes from Isaiah 42, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit on him. He will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not strive nor shout, neither will anyone hear his voice in the streets. So here's the thing about him. Even though he was misunderstood and even reviled and mistreated, he wasn't out in the streets complaining about how he was treated. He had a message to share, and he cared about the people. That's what he talked about, not how badly he was being treated, even though he was. He didn't complain of hardships, but he trusted his Father in heaven. It says he won't break a bruised reed. He won't quench a smoking flax. Now think about this, a bruised reed, a smoking flax. This is, in both cases, talking about someone in just the slenderest situation. Just think like a bruised reed. Think about the stem on a reed being crushed. What would it take to just cause that to fall over and be done with? When Yeshua looked at all the people, what did he say about them? Scattered about like sheep without a shepherd, right? He didn't take advantage of the people. He didn't in any way hurt them. He didn't exploit them like we see so many powerful people doing. But instead, he encouraged, helped them, even healed them, set them free from demonic oppression, and shared the truth with them. This is what he did. And then it says, until he leads justice to victory. Now just think of what this means. We're in a world of injustice. The world has been like this and getting worse for 6,000 years. And we're all pretty sick of it by now. And it says that he is going to lead justice to victory. That means the end of injustice, right? It means finally there's going to be a victory for justice and righteousness in the world. This is talking about his triumphant return, when he will inflict judgment upon the wicked, and bring deliverance for the righteous. Isaiah 42, it's really interesting. In his name, the nations will hope. This is basically from the Septuagint version, which was in use at that time, where it says, in his name shall the Gentiles trust. What's it talking about? Well, it's certainly talking about the scattered remnant who are scattered among all of the Gentiles, but it's equally talking about grafted in Gentile believers in all nations. And even now, there are believers around the world who are trusting and hoping in his name. When we look at him, when we look at how he kept the Sabbath, that it was about other people, it was about their needs, it was about loving Yahweh and obeying him, it was about loving your neighbor. He had the ability to heal people, so he used it on the Sabbath and every other day. No wonder the nations hope in him. Certainly, we hope in him because he has taught us that the heart of the Sabbath is love.
You have been listening to Hebraic Insights in the Gospels. More information on the Sabbath, the original calendar of the Bible, the Torah as it was meant to be understood and kept, and other topics can be found on our membership site, Zion Tabernacle. Sign up is free. Just go to tsiyon.net to see what you can learn today. That's tsiyon.net. Or click the membership link on the Zion Road website. New programs on the Gospels will be airing every Sabbath on Zion Road Radio. Join us next Shabbat to learn more in the book of Matthew. Shabbat Shalom!
Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is. And walk in it. And you'll find rest for your soul. You'll find rest for your souls. Oh, you'll find rest for your souls when you walk in his ways. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths.
Enjoying this episode of Hebraic Insights in the Gospels? Want to hear more teachings from Eliyahu ben David? Tune in to our 24/7 internet radio station, Zion Road Messianic Radio. You can catch the latest episodes of Hebraic Insights in the Gospels before they're released as a podcast, learn more about what Zion Ministry teaches from our other programs, and listen to a host of uplifting songs from our independent Messianic music artists. To tune in to our station, go to zion.org. That's tsiyon.org. Or search for Zion Road Messianic Radio. Again, that's Zion, spelled T-S-I-Y-O-N, in your favorite internet radio app or station directory. Don't miss the latest episodes. Go to tsiyon.org and check the station schedule to see what's playing.